I improved my LSAT score from a 152 to a 175. Let me show you what I did. Hey, what's up everybody? Steve Schwartz here from LSAT Unplugged, joining you today to share how I've improved my LSAT score from a 152 to a 175. Before I get into it, a little bit about LSAT Unplugged. We offer live online classes via Zoom, on-demand video courses, small group coaching, and one-on-one coaching. Check out the links below this video to find out more and to book a call with me and my team. We'd love to help you out. So the reason I'm making this video is that a lot of folks are looking for significant score increases, and to that end, I'd love to show you how I improved my LSAT score significantly by about 23 points. This is just what worked for me. It may not work for you. In fact, out of the 3 bizarre strategies I'm going to share with you today, one of them I actually would not recommend doing under any circumstances. The other 2 I do recommend. Let me get into it. The first strategy I recommend that I personally employed was to do every single LSAT logic game ever released. And then beyond that, I wrote my own LSAT logic games. So step 1 here was to do all the LSAT logic games released up to that point. At that point, there were about 250 or so. Today, of course, there are a bit more, but I did those 250 or so logic games that were released at the time multiple times to allow me to better see the patterns between the different games. Then, and only then, I started writing my own LSAT logic games from scratch to get a better perspective about the test maker's point of view. Because the test makers are very clever, they're devious, they're sneaky, they love laying tricks and traps for unaware test takers. And so I figured, what better way to learn to spot the tricks and traps than to start creating some of my own? And so to that end, I wrote about 10 of my own actual logic games. They're unofficial, of course. LSAC, please don't sue me. They're unofficial games I wrote just for illustrative purposes, and I've included those inside the LSAT Unplugged course, along with detailed walkthroughs to show you what some more difficult than average, harder than average logic games could look like, to show you what it looks like when you take out all the stops, you pull out all the stops, and you do as many tricks and traps in those games as possible to catch the unsuspecting test taker unaware and lead them down a wrong, incorrect path. And so that's why I wrote those games, to help me better understand it and then to do the same for you as well. So that's strategy number 1, was to do every game ever released and then write my own unofficial logic games to better understand what goes into making games. The second unique strategy I employed was to write my own unofficial LSAT explanations for real LSAT questions. This was a way for me to level up the depth of my review process. It's too easy to take exam after exam, measure your results, be happy or sad about them, and move on. It's much tougher and more taxing to slow down, do fewer questions, and review those questions you complete in more depth. And so to that end, I started writing my own explanations that were in-depth enough, detailed enough, that they would reasonably be useful for another test taker without me having to explain to them outside of what was written on the page or, of course, actually on the screen. So I wrote my own actual LSAT explanations as part of my own review process. And then later, when I became a teacher, I started publishing those explanations for others to benefit from. I eventually wrote over 1,000 explanations for real LSAT questions. They're available to students in my courses and actually on Amazon as well for everyone to benefit. Now, the number 3 technique I used, and this one I do not recommend, was to eat an entire can of tuna fish at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning under the misguided impression that this extra protein would power my brain and lead me to get a top score. What ended up happening instead is that my stomach soundly rejected the intrusion of an entire can of tuna fish at such an early morning hour, and I ended up promptly throwing up the entire thing. And so I went on my journey to the test center on a Saturday morning in New York City when the city was still asleep. I grabbed a banana on the way to the subway from a fruit stand on the corner, and I went to the test with a barely settled stomach. And it turned out barely keeping down any food that morning ended up working out quite well for me, actually, because I ended up getting my 175. So if I had to do it all over again, I can't say I would have approached it the same way, but I can say that I learned a valuable lesson I'd love to share with you now, which is on the morning of the test or the day of the test, whatever you're going to eat, do a dry run or two with that same diet and that same routine at least a couple of times prior. And of course, there are other ways to get protein into your system rather than eating an entire can of tuna fish at 7 a.m. You may want to instead take a protein shake or an energy bar, a granola bar, or some eggs maybe, something lighter, maybe some hard-boiled eggs if you can prepare them the day before. That might be a better way to handle it and still get the same amount of protein into your system, but that was my experience. Another lesson here is that even if things don't go perfectly the day of the test, you can still end up with a top score despite that, and maybe because of that, you're overcoming an obstacle. It sharpens your resolve, it sharpens the intensity of your focus, and can lead you ultimately to get your goals or score above your PT average. So anyway, folks, that's all for now. I hope you found the video helpful. Again, the 3 major takeaways were, from my journey, were to, number 1, do every game ever released, and then, beyond that, write your own logic games from scratch as a creative exercise to understand the test maker's perspective. Number 2, write your own LSAT explanations as part of your review process. And number 3, which I wouldn't recommend, eat an entire can of tuna fish the morning of the test. Don't do that. Instead, find other ways to get protein into your system that your stomach will be able to handle, especially if you're taking the test early in the morning. Anyway, folks, again, that's all for now. Hope you found the video helpful. If you did, please do me a favor. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Maybe you know someone aiming to get a significant score increase of 20 points or more. Maybe you know someone aiming for a 175 on their actual test. Or maybe you know someone who's tried all the conventional approaches already and is at the point where they're ready to try something different. In the meantime, folks, I wish you all the best and take care.